What's going on? My name is Nate Schatzline, and you are watching the For Liberty and Justice podcast, where we seek to mobilize the church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and justice. Today is going to be wild. Me and Josh were just recently at the border in Eagle Pass, Texas. We're going to tell you a little bit about that today, and then we're going to dig into some of the policy that was passed in the Texas legislature, as well as some of the injustices that we see going on with our federal government and our border. This is going to be wild, so buckle up, Patriots. Here we go. So we're here. Josh is on our team, and you've heard from him on the For Liberty and Justice podcast many times before. I think as we're approaching this topic today, this has been, when you look at the polling results, we just came out of the New Hampshire primary, which was crazy.
Wild.
Trump, come on, MAGA 2024.
That's it, man.
And Nikki Haley just needs to drop out. It's wild. It's over. But looking at it, Josh, you were a state representative in the state of New Hampshire. When you were running, the issue of the border was not even on the forefront of the American mind. What years did you serve in New Hampshire?
Yeah, that was 2014 to 2018.
Yeah, so 2014 to 2018, we were talking about economy. We were talking about social issues, but more than anything, that's pre-Roe overturning. You were fighting for the unborn. Today, we're seeing an insane focus on the border from conservative voters, which they should. To me, I've said this often, there's no more important issue than securing the Texas border. There's nothing else more important, because out of the border is going to come the future of Texas, which is going to be the future of the United States of America. And right now we are literally seeing millions of illegal, undocumented people crossing over the Texas border. And regardless of the efforts of what we're doing in Texas, we're seeing it being undermined by the federal government. Speak to the idea, Josh is a constitutional expert, works with us on our content team, helping develop clear-minded thought and vision for the church and the future of Christians being engaged in understanding constitutional literacy. Speak to this issue, because I'm a state lawmaker, and I can't make sense of the fact that we're being undermined by our own federal government right now. Speak to what we as a state can do, how that is actually affected on a policy scale, and why we as a state of Texas have to jump into this fight regardless of where the federal government is.
Yeah, well, I'll start off by saying this is why political order is important, right? And you could swap out order for harmony, political harmony, meaning the federal government and the state governments and the local governments work cohesively with one another. There's an agreement there. There's an understanding that there's a hierarchy in government all the way down to the local level, and that's how you should approach the federal powers and local powers. But when we're looking at the border and we're talking about the governor's response versus the president's response, it's unfortunately for powers today, it's tricky, right? Because you've got Biden, the current presidential administration, who's refusing to do anything. And realistically, the Congress, the federal Congress, actually has nearly sole authority over the border. And it's actually under in the Constitution, part of the Article 1, Section 8, right, of the federal powers. And you have Congress shall have power to make all laws which shall be necessary and proper for carrying into execution the foregoing powers and all other powers vested in by this Constitution in the government of the United States or any department or officer thereof. So there is congressional power there to secure the border. And then the question comes up, so why aren't we? Well, that's because we have enemies of the state. We really do. We have people in power right now who don't want the border secure. They want nationals to flood in. They want foreign people to come in who are not supposed to be here, who should be coming through these proper channels. So when it comes down to it, and we're talking about the governor's response, we're still fleshing that issue out. Right. Recently, we had a Supreme Court decision that was a 5-4 decision, which said that the Border Patrol cannot be blocked by Texas National Guard. So that's 4 Supreme Court justices said, no, the National Guard should be allowed to do it. 5 said, no, they shouldn't. So I'm curious.
Explain that in layman's terms for everyone watching, like when it comes to Texas National Guard, which we as the legislature in Texas have authority over them, the governor technically, and we legislate through them. we as state legislators have no authority when it comes to federal border patrol. Explain the difference of who's down there on the border right now, and then we'll get into kind of our experiences. But I just help everyone understand why that's such an important point, that they're two different entities and in many ways don't even work together because they have two competing goals.
Right. And that's the problem. What you just said, there's two competing goals. There shouldn't be competing goals. They should be working cohesively with one another because we have one national interest. And that in this case is to protect the border. Unfortunately, we don't. And so the Border Patrol is governed by Homeland Security, right? Mayorkas, who heads over that. And then you have him under Biden, the Biden administration. They govern all that entire entity. Then you have the Texas National Guard, which is solely governed by the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott. And because you have these competing interests, now the question arises, how do we secure our border if the federal government as an entity, right, according to the Homeland Security, is essentially saying, no, we're going to leave the border open and we're going to help him jump off. Like when we saw 3 weeks ago, climb down the ladder, DPS is going to help him out.
We actually have video of that, and we're going to insert that in for you to see.
Yeah.
But this is an important, we caught as much of the video as we could, but I'll just kind of describe the scenario. So me and Josh had the privilege of going down with one of our close friends, Yaku Boyens, who, if you don't know who that is, we've had him on the show before. We're going to have him on again. He's on the forefront of fighting against the human trafficking epidemic across our world, and really focused in on what's going on in the United States as it relates to sex trafficking. And, they came out with a documentary called Sex Nation, where they exposed the sexual agenda on children and on women in our country. But Yaku took us down there. And we'll get into kind of what took place in our interactions with federal Border Patrol at a Border Patrol station, which was shocking. However, one of the things that I want to highlight is that when we walked up to what they would call, we're in Eagle Pass, Texas, but what they would call a check-in point or, a legal point of entry. We're watching it. People are literally subverting it as we walked up. They're walking around it. And it was a shocking moment as we saw there's a legal port of entry crossing a bridge from Mexico. There's a water underneath the bridge. And then there are shipping containers that have been built and placed there as a natural barrier with razor wire over it. We have on video a man who, even though the legal port of entry is right above him on the bridge, right above him and to the left, he's swam over. He climbs on top of the massive shipping container, and then he throws his jacket over the razor wire so that he can just climb over. And we have on video, and we're going to show that video of him climbing over and then signaling to the people that he's coming of come on over. And this was one of the most shocking moments to me because I'm watching as Border Patrol agents are on the ground and they're right there. And they're just watching it happen. They're not even moving. And people are illegally crossing. We don't know who these people are. And then the audacity that this law enforcement at the border then goes, takes a ladder, and helps the man illegally cross.
That's exactly
which is mind-blowing. Where I'm sitting here going, you don't know who that is. You don't know what they're bringing into the country. You don't know who they are. Are they on some sort of criminal registry from Mexico or from another nation? We don't know. We don't know if they're a terrorist. We don't know if they're a sleeper cell. We don't know if they're a violent criminal. We don't know if they're a rapist. We don't know that if Mexico sent them over from their prison system. We don't know who's crossing, and that is the point. And I think that's the point that we have to get Christians to understand, is that we have been sold a lie from the left that says, well, if you're a believer, we have to look at the scriptures that say that we're supposed to house the immigrant. No, for sure. However, we are not going to house those who subvert the law by coming through a legal point of entry so that we understand who they are and so that we can hold them accountable to the actions that they take once they come into our sovereign nation that we care about. And so ultimately, as believers, we have to take a stance. Watch this video as we see this man jump on the shipping container and cross over. What we just witnessed and you see in the video is actually some of the migrants coming across, climbing over, taking their jacket off and putting it over the razor wire to climb over, and then officers actually bringing a ladder to help them
climb down.
So, Josh, you just watched that video. Your reaction?
Yeah, I was stunned. I mean, it was wild to see. We know it's happening every day, right? But to see it with your own eyes. In fact, I just called my father and I said, "You got to see this video. I'm about to send it to you." And he goes, "Yeah, that's bad."
That's
and
bad.
I said, but and so to the point of DPS, it was interesting because we heard from DPS that they were assisting them not because necessarily they wanted them to come over, but because their local hospitals are being overrun with people already. And
This is a great point,
right?
Yeah.
And so they said, rather than have our hospitals overrun, we'd rather help them down because they're going to come over anyway. And that is just mind-boggling to me because there's a really large part of the majority of me is saying, don't do that. Don't help them. You are helping possible potential terrorists come over into our country.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I understand that portion of
So
sympathy.
I mean, yeah, devil's
And I'm
advocate here is, do we want to help people illegally cross? No, but we're putting DPS in a position because we know that Federal Border Patrol is not going to allow them to be sent back. And
Right.
so DPS is simply saying, hey, look, we can give him a ladder to help him climb down, or he can break both ankles, and then the taxpayer has to pay for his medical bills when he crosses over. And so they're in an impossible situation. And it was just a heartbreaking scenario to watch as they're powerless. We've set them up to fail. We've set them up to allow dangerous criminals into our country, all in the name of compassion, when in reality, it is the least compassionate thing you could do to allow dangerous criminals to come near our children and set the tone for our nation, thus robbing us of what our nation was intended to be, which would be a safe haven for those who are fighting for freedom.
Right.
And it's dangerous. It's dangerous what it is.
That's exactly right.
So we're in Eagle Pass. One of the most impactful things that we saw was when we were going up, we got the honor of meeting with a rancher there.
Yes.
He owns the ranch. I believe it's 350-acre ranch, but he's right along the border and right along the river there. And one of the most heartbreaking things we saw was walking, and we saw children's clothing lying everywhere, where people have been trafficked across the border, where children swam through the river. Some die.
Yeah.
I believe it was this rancher said that in 1 week he had seen 57 dead bodies on his property.
Yeah, correct.
And they have to go searching for children wandering in the fields.
And a Border Patrol agent, in fact, or was it DPS or Border Patrol?
Border Patrol
had in fact committed suicide on his land.
On his land because of what things that he had seen.
It's heartbreaking. So when people talk about how conservatives are not compassionate, that's just not true.
Correct.
That's just not true at all. We're the ones going down to the border, like you and I did 3 weeks ago, trying to figure out solutions for Texas and examining this situation, just like a lot of other people, dozens of other people are doing the exact same thing. But one thing that really struck me, Nate, was not just the articles of clothing. I mean, there had to be hundreds of thousands of those at least, if not millions perhaps, just on his section of land. But it's the fact that when they are crossing the border, the moment they hit that land, that there's this conversation, a dispute going on. Why don't you have it in the water as opposed to land? Because the moment their foot touches land, there's all these new regulations that come into play and these sort of privileges that these immigrants get, right? And so one thing that struck me was the fact that, correct me if I'm wrong, the moment they come over to the border, they have an $85,000, it's $75,000 or $85,000 loan from the cartel that they immediately owe back that minute when they step on it.
It's wild. I don't remember the exact number, but I do know that the interest on that loan is
30%.
It's insane. And so essentially what we're dealing with, and this is what we were talking about with the rancher, and this is why I want this podcast to be one that's filled with solutions that are focused on carrying the heart of Christ while also having strong borders, because we believe that sovereignty is God's idea, not man's idea. As we look through Scripture, the heart of Christ was that Israel would be a sovereign nation. Yep. Isn't it amazing that what we get called bigots for is actually put in Scripture as a God idea? That if we have a sovereign nation, then we can govern under the authority of Scripture. And, a lot of people would really get upset with us for saying governing under the authority of Scripture. But the reality is, if you have no absolute truth, then you have no truth.
That's right.
And so we look at Scripture as the absolute truth, knowing that sovereignty is such a brilliant idea because, hear me on this, if you do not have a border, you do not have a nation.
That's correct.
And that's really important for people to understand that America is not the first to attempt to have a strong border. You know,
every nation.
Every nation.
In fact, that's what. Remember, like if you go back in the medieval times, in the Dark Ages, castles, they all have a border. They have walls. That's the whole point. If you don't have that, then what are you?
Isn't it ironic that the people who advocate for open borders have some of the highest paid and most equipped bodyguards, bodymen, and walls that surround their place of residence?
So true.
It's so hypocritical. You tell me that Kamala Harris doesn't put a lock on her door. You tell me that Mayorkas doesn't have private security watching him. You tell me that you can just walk into the White House? Of course you can't. There's a wall with razor wire.
That's right.
And that's the irony, is it not? Is that it's always here's a law for thee, but not for me. I want to be protected, but I don't want the American people to get that same protection. This is the type of corruption we see inside not only this presidential regime, and I do call it a regime because I see the Biden administration as much more than just a presidential cabinet. I see it very much as a symbol of what takes place when we abdicate our role as the church to stand. It is a tyrannical regime that's not being controlled by that man who I firmly believe, and this is no insult, this is just the truth, I firmly believe has early onset dementia or at least some major form of cognitive decline. It's sad. And ultimately, if we wanted to make a case for who should be president of the United States, I believe voting for Joe Biden is elder abuse. Yeah, I believe it truly is.
So Nate, here's what I want to figure out, and I think probably the viewers are really thinking hard on this, and you as a state legislator for the state of Texas here can shed some light on this. I know Texans want solutions, right? They go, okay, that's great. You know, you went down to the border, but what did you learn? What did you bring any golden nuggets that can help serve the people in Austin? And I think that's what we're really getting down to is we experience something awful at the border. People are crossing over that shouldn't be. Now, what's the solution? And I know that you have put forward some bills, or some people have put them on behalf of you, right? And you helped co-sponsor them. And correct me if I'm one of those. Is SB 4?
SB 4.
Can you shed light on
SB 4 passed during the most recent special session here in the Texas legislature, and I think it's really important to understand. You know, we don't just work with English-speaking churches. We actually work with Spanish-speaking churches. We have a very, very large, growing Hispanic community amongst our For Liberty and Justice family. And it's beautiful to see as Hispanic churches are rallying behind truth because, you know, Hispanic culture, and you know this, and many of our friends know this, Pastor Fidel, who we work closely with here in Fort Worth, the Hispanic culture shares Christian values. It's very much a community that carries Christian conservative values that value truth and substance deep in the roots of their culture.
That's right.
And we see as an entire people group have been very much hijacked by the Democratic Party to believe that the Democratic Party is advocating for them when in reality they're doing very much the opposite. They're exploiting them for a vote. And so, and I want to show how that is. And so a prime example is SB 4. You know, SB 4 comes to the floor. At the time, when I was fighting for it at first, it was a House bill. And this House bill that came to the floor, carried by Representative Spiller, he's a friend in the Texas House, he brings this bill forward, and there was a major issue with the bill that I had. But the reality is that I was willing to work with anyone who is willing to secure our Texas border, because as much as the border should not be a state's issue, it's actually a federal issue. At some point, if an invasion is declared, the state of Texas has to rise up and actually do something about it. And so that's what we did. I mean, we stood up, and don't get me wrong, I have a lot of issues with, and you know, there's a lot of Republican infighting going on right now. But one thing we can rally around is that securing our Texas border is the number one priority in the state of Texas. And so this bill comes to the floor, the House bill, not SB 4, but originally the House bill. And on this House bill, it's very clear. It makes illegally crossing the border a state jail felony. Now, the reason that that's vitally important is a few different things. Number one, in order for us to deport someone back, it has to be a crime to cross over. It's absurd that it wasn't a crime before. It wasn't a felony before. And so now what we're looking at is, well, number one, we're going to be able to charge them with a crime. The argument, and to play devil's advocate on the other side, is, Nate, our prisons are already overrun. How can we possibly fit every illegal immigrant that crosses over into our prison system? And they're absolutely right. We can't. We don't have the infrastructure for it. We don't have enough jail cells. We don't have enough law enforcement to be able to enforce that, which is why the bill creates a state jail felony. But this is the way that the bill operates. The original bill that we were fighting for, and then I'll get into SB4. The original bill was that it was a state jail felony. However, you had three options when you cross over the border. If you cross over the border, your first option is to turn around and go back, and you won't be charged. You can turn around and go back. The second option is Border Patrol, DPS will give you a ride to the nearest Border Patrol point of entry. And in the process of giving you a ride, we'll make sure that you walk through legally and go through the proper steps, which for me, that's great. The third option is that you're charged with a state jail felony. And so in reality, it's a very humane way of doing it, to where we're giving options. We're making sure you've got the option of either returning, going through the proper procedure, or being charged with a crime. It's not an automatic ticket charged with a crime. So here was the issue I had with that House bill. A few different things. Number one, I'm not entirely sure that the state of Texas and our taxpayer dollars should be used as an Uber service for illegal immigrants. And so I go back and forth on that one.
Yeah.
I understand that if it's a woman or child that's suffering or dying, that it's important for us to meet the need of those coming across.
Case-by-case
Absolutely.
basis. Yeah.
It's got to be, I agree. They should be able to make the decision at the time, because the reality is that we should not, able-bodied men, be giving Uber rides to the legal point of entry. We just shouldn't. A woman or child that's struggling, that's starving, that otherwise is going to die. Absolutely. I mean, that's humanity, right? We've got to meet the need. That's the thing that matters. However, we as the state of Texas did not cause their suffering.
Well, yeah.
We as the state of Texas are not the root cause of it. And so one of the things that bothered me was inside of this bill, and we've talked with Jaco Boyens about this, we've talked with Border Patrol about this, we've talked with DPS about this. Just saying you have to go through a legal point of entry, that doesn't mean anything, because the federal government's going to undermine what we do. And so as the bill sat on the House floor, essentially what it said was, if you're a DPS agent and you pick up someone, let's say it's 5 able-bodied men coming across from China, which we'll get into the statistics of who's actually crossing into our border. And many people think it's just people from Mexico, when it is in fact not. Let's say if it's five Chinese nationalists crossing our border, they're picked up. They go inside of a DPS vehicle, they get a ride to the legal point of entry, and the legal point of entry, Border Patrol decides, well, we're just going to let them through.
Right.
It was completely undermined. There was no point in our law. Well, I saw through this, and a few other legislators did as well. And so we joint authored an amendment on the original House bill to make sure that in the field, DPS could collect biometric data. That's photos of the illegal immigrant. That's facial recognition software. That's information about that illegal immigrant that would then be given to local law enforcement throughout the state of Texas and disseminated so that we could hold these people accountable if they break the law in the state of Texas. That would at least give us an account of who's crossing over the border.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
For 16 hours, Josh, I fought for that amendment. For 16 hours. I went back and forth with the bill author. And hear me on this. The way that bills work is, if you let one amendment on, there's 1,000 more that follow that are going to try and get on. Uh-huh. I'm very grateful for David Spiller, representative, who went to bat for me, talked to the governor's office, and we got that amendment added on. And so that House bill gets across the floor. However, the bill was not as strong as it needed to be. So the Senate sent it back and said absolutely not, which came SB4. SB4 included biometric data to be taken inside of that. It also included some provisions that I think are really important. To highlight, we have to highlight them, which is this is the side that our Hispanic churches did not recognize, because when you're talking about, some of our Spanish-speaking Texans, oftentimes their media source is Telemundo. Or one of the left-wing media sources that do nothing but lie. It's fake news.
So
Come on,
true.
it's fake news.
So true.
And we're talking about people that are listening to, an explanation of SB4 that are simply saying, "Oh, you don't understand. Everyone's getting deported. It's illegal to come across into the United States of America." Not even true. But since when does the media ever get held accountable for the lies? And so they're just lying about it. And so one of the things that I did is I sat down with some of our Hispanic leaders inside of one of the churches we have partnership with and said, "Hey, look, there's actually these provisions inside of this law that are very compassionate." One of the provisions is, and one of the pieces of the law is that we don't deny women and children water and resources when they come across. We don't allow them to drown inside the river. It's humane. Some of the other things that we walk through are, it's technically, when they're seeking medical help. If a woman comes across who's been trafficked, who's been raped multiple times by the cartel, which is very common coming across, we don't deny them medical treatment. We help them right there and right then. And I think it's important to highlight these things because oftentimes we as legislators who believe in strong borders, who believe in defending our nation and the sovereignty of our nation and making sure that we have the law enforcement and being able to back that up so that we can protect from future terrorist attacks, we can protect from the fentanyl that's pouring into our state and our nation, that we can protect from the human and drug trafficking that's coming across the border. I think we get a bad rap sometimes for being heartless, when in reality, it's everything is the opposite. We have Democrat lawmakers that want open borders that, without saying it, advocating for open borders is advocating for human trafficking. It's advocating for drug trafficking and for the opioid crisis and for fentanyl to come across our streets. Being open, pro-open border is evil. It truly is evil, and we have to call it out for what it is.
Yeah, no, that's so true, Nate. And I wanted to touch up on that real quick because you're right. There has been this narrative around those who are pro-open border, or I should say those who are pro-closing the border or securing the border at the very minimum. That there's no compassion there. And there is. It's important. I think when people begin to speak on things that they don't know about, that's the problem. And for the border, as a great example here, people haven't been able to visit the border. They don't really know what's going on. Even if you haven't visited the border, at least do the research and understand what's going on. It's not as simple as somebody just comes over and in 1 year you get your citizenship and you're done and you're ready to go. No, there's a whole process that goes, and people have to do that legally. Otherwise, it's the very same thing as you being on your property. You live in a really nice home, you're in a secure neighborhood, and then somebody just opens up the door and walks in. Well, who wants that to happen in their private home?
Right.
No one wants to have that.
Right.
That's your castle. That's your home. That's your place of safety and peace for you and your family. And somebody just walks in without your invite. That's called breaking and entering, and that's what we have going on at the border. We're happy to invite guests in for a time or include them in as brand new citizens, but there has to be a process for it. And so I think that's important. And thank you for shedding light on SB4 and explaining that process, because I don't think people understand it. And to be clear, SB4 is Senate bill, HB is House bill.
Correct.
Just as a quick legislative
Each bill has to go through both chambers, but whoever authored the bill, whether it be a state senator or a state representative, if a state representative wrote it, it's considered an HB. If a state senator carried it first, it's considered an SB. So one thing to add on to this and what believers have to know about this bill. So here's the underlying cause of why I think it's one of the most important reasons that we passed this bill, making it a state jail felony to illegally enter. Those are scary words, especially for believers that, many believers watching our podcast might be engaged in this idea that Christians should be civically engaged, but maybe they're new. Maybe you're watching and you're new to this concept of, okay, I got to vote. I got to get out there and I got to advocate. It's so easy to get your mind twisted around, especially policy issues that you might not understand. Let me tell you why this bill, for me, is one of the most important bills that we could have passed in the state of Texas. So it's no secret that we have a human trafficking epidemic going on in the state of Texas. Millions have been trafficked across our southern border. In fact, what we know about it is that, and Jaco Booyens said this so well on the podcast that we had from him, but what we see is that the cartel knows that they can get federal money if they bring a child across the border, because there are resources that the federal government will give to that child from that point forward. So one of the most evil things, and it's hard to believe that this is true, it's hard to believe that this is happening, but we have to wrap our minds around the evil of what's going on. The cartel will then go to a resident of Mexico or Guatemala or Venezuela, and they will say, "Hey, we are going to pay you to take your child across the border, but we'll return them. And when we return them, there will be an additional payment." And what they're saying is, we want to get federal money for your child, but we don't want you to cross. We just want to take your child. And because these nations are in poverty, many times the families will allow their child to be taken across the border. And what will happen is the cartel then will take that child, they will cross over, they will gain the money from the federal government that is given to each child that crosses the border. Then they will recycle that child back through the border to do it all over again at another point of entry. Let me tell you the evil behind this. So not only is that child being exploited for federal taxpayer dollars in the United States, he's not coming to this nation. She's not coming to this nation. They're being put in a sex trafficking ring where they're sold to the highest bidder every single night. So not only is the cartel getting the federal money that comes along with bringing a child across the border, they're getting the money from selling that child each evening as he comes across. As we started diving into this issue, I was disgusted. So I filed a bill this last session that would allow us to recognize if a child was being trafficked or not. It was very simple. We started really strong, and then we had to change the methods because it wasn't going to be possible to get a hearing for it. But what we said is we need to do blood tests for every child coming across so that we can understand if the person with the child is their actual parent or not. Right. We're going to compare the blood test. Well, that was immediately shut down. Well, Nate, don't you know it's inhumane to test blood? What? They're being sex trafficked.
Yeah.
And so I said, you know what? That's fine. I found out that there's a technology where we actually can do a saliva test. It's incredibly humane. And I had Democrats come up to me, Josh, in the Texas legislature and say, well, Nate, they've been through enough. You really want to make them get a swab test in their mouth? Now, Josh, these are the same people.
COVID.
These are the same people that said you either have to wear a mask in the classroom as a kindergartner or you have to take a test every day where they touch your tonsils with a swab. And you're telling me that it's inhumane to take a saliva test to make sure you're not being sex trafficked? That was their argument. And so we pushed back and said, no, absolutely not. This is an important bill. We have to be able to tell. So then I got hit with the fact that you can't take DNA unless a crime has been committed. The reason that that's so incredibly important is because without the passage of SB 4, which makes it a state jail felony to cross the border, we had no grounds to test the DNA of a child to ensure that they were with their rightful guardian. And so SB 4 just opened up a new door for us as the state legislature to say, fantastic. Now let's test DNA so that we can rescue children and women from sex trafficking. This is huge. It's a massive step, and the church needs to know it.
Yeah, Nate, that's great. I have a few questions that we got from some folks before the show started, and we just wanted to field those questions and ask you about them and get your take on each one of these.
Great.
The first one is there a shortage of trial dates for legal citizenship or admittance into the country?
It's so funny.
And before we do that, what is a trial date? Can we talk about that with Jaco Booyan on the trip?
We touched it briefly.
Yeah.
And Jaco, again, it was fantastic. He covers it so well. So right now what happens from the federal government is people, in order to cross our border illegally, all you have to do is download an app on your cell phone. That's it. Download an app on your cell phone. Put in a name. And then they give you a court date to appear in 5 to 10 years at a random courthouse. Get this, no paperwork, no follow-up, no accountability.
Correct me if I'm wrong. There's not even a location on the...
Some of these don't even have the location of where you're supposed to appear. So it's just, hey, appear in court in 2035. Where? Just appear. Can you imagine? That's what's going on right now at our southern border and across Texas lines. There's these fake court dates. They're just fake. They're not even real. They know they're not going to show up. They know that they're not going to be there. They know that once they enter in, they're just there. And I'm going to tell you the plot. And I think this is important to highlight on this question specifically, because Oftentimes, people ask me, they say, Nate, why on earth would Democrats advocate for open borders with everything you've just said? Well, I'll get on a show or I'll get in a conversation with a constituent, with another politician, and it's very clear. I was talking to Senator Ted Cruz at an event about this, and he was making a speech, and it became clear to me because for a long time, I've sat here and I've wondered, I've met Democrats, and although we have a different worldview, although that we have a different ideology, I've met certain Democrats that aren't necessarily evil people. At least they wouldn't perceive themselves as that way. They're deceived. They're deceived. They think one thing is one way, and it's just simply not. They've been told a lie. They bought in. They bought into this idea that one of the fruits of the Spirit is being nice, when in reality that's not true. We've got to look at what honors the Lord, which is fighting for righteousness, biblical justice, and being a reformer and taking a stand. And I've had this thought of why on earth, this is what I've been asked, why on earth would a Democrat advocate for such policies when, they say that they're pro-woman, they say that they're pro-child, which we know that's not the case with the policies that they advocate for. But they say that they're pro-freedom, which we know is not the case. And they say, we're pro-compassion. Nate, why would they advocate for this if they truly are? And the answer is very simple. This is all about retaining power. That's what it is.
That's all it. Yep.
So we know as a matter of fact, and Democrats in the Senate, the U.S. Senate, and in U.S. Congress have said this to be the case, that if they can if they can retain the Senate in Democrat control in 2024, coming into the general election, and if they can win back the House, and I believe that after all those that have resigned and those that have been removed, such as the congressman out of New York that was just removed, I believe we have a one-person majority as a Republican Party inside of the U.S. House. So if they can win back the House, they can retain the Senate. This is from Senator Ted Cruz that I got this information from. It's brilliant. And if they can retain the White House, the first order of business will be to work on voting rights and make sure that anyone can vote regardless of your citizenship status. And what they understand is that because they have advocated for open borders, they understand that is millions of votes that will be flooding in across the southern border, across Texas lines, using our taxpayer funds to send their children to university when ours can't go because it's too expensive. And record inflation, they get all of the tax benefits. They get everything, medical care, you name it, where they're coming across robbing U.S. citizens, taxpayers, of their ability to put their children in a position to succeed. And here we are. They have told us, Democrats, they say it out loud now, that one of their first orders of business is to make sure that there are voting rights for illegal aliens as they cross the border. I want to be very clear. This is sinister. This is evil. This is corruption. This right here is the agenda of the left and is the agenda of those that have godless ideology, that retaining power far outweighs in their mind any humanitarian cause, any ability to do the right thing, any ability to stand for true justice, any ability to protect people. Retaining power is the ultimate goal. And Democrats understand that if they can win the House, retain the Senate, retain the White House, then all of a sudden they have millions of voters.
That's
millions
exactly
that will
right.
never allow us to win another election in the United States of America.
That's so true. And I want to address a point here, too, I think is super important for viewers and for the conversation at hand. We have a moral and political order here in the United States. Again, going back to the beginning of the show, we were talking about moral and political harmony. That is cohesiveness in both our moral order, right?
Yes.
And then we also have our political harmony, which is the cohesiveness of the state, federal, local governments working together. One of the biggest reasons why illegal immigration is so dangerous is because it threatens our moral order. Consider this for the viewers. We have, as individuals and families, we have customs, we have traditions, we have values, we have principles, right? Typically, at least in the past, it was known that the traditional American family or typical American family would go to church on Sunday. Every Sunday you were at church. You honored the Sabbath, right? And we had a culture in the average American household that we operated by, not because we were forced to by law, but because that's who we are. That's in our DNA. That's in our psyche. That's a part of what it is to be an American. And that is being threatened when you allow foreign nationals who don't belong here to flood the border by the millions.
That's right.
And to your point, Nate, it is diabolical, it is evil, but it is also intentional by those who are in power, particularly the leftist Democrats, right? That's why they support open border, but they will use the excuse of, well, aren't you pro-family? Aren't you pro-woman and pro-child and pro-freedom? That's no. That's not freedom. Freedom isn't what you just allow anything to happen.
Yeah.
No, freedom within the confines of a moral code.
That's right.
And in a moral order and a political order. That's what matters. And that's what we're really talking about here. And I think I wanted to drive that point home because I think people tend to forget that. And they go, oh, yeah, that is going to threaten my life. If it doesn't threaten my life in the next 30 years, it'll definitely threaten my children's lives and my grandchildren's lives. And that's important. But I wanted to touch up on a couple more questions here for you, Nate. We often hear the story of those who are genuinely seeking asylum, but can you explain the numbers of people who are entering with ill intentions? Do we have accurate data? What does the data that we have show so we can be more aware of the severity of the border issues?
Some of the biggest data points that I think are important to list is that we have roughly 2.5 million people that have crossed our border, illegally
this year, or
we don't even know actually the total number, but we're talking we're talking millions that have crossed this year. So now all of a sudden, what we're recognizing is we have this influx of millions of people that are unchecked. That there's no record in the United States of their arrival. Therefore, we don't know their criminal history. We don't know their background. I think it's also important to know that this isn't even like an anti-Mexico initiative, because many people think that people are just coming from Mexico, when in reality, we know that not to be the case.
Nope.
Some of the most recent figures are, people don't even know this, but 24,048 Chinese nationals have come through our southern Texas border. 24,000 plus Chinese nationals. I don't know if people understand this, but one of the greatest threats to the United States of America right now is the communist nation of China.
Yeah.
Whether that be through cyber attacks, whether that be through them trying to shut down our economy, whether that be through war. We don't know. We know that they can't stand America. We know that under the Biden administration, we have a very, very weak footing in the national stage when it comes to, protecting our interests inside of the nation. We know that the Biden administration is weak and is not strong on foreign policy. We've never been more vulnerable, and now 24,000 Chinese nationals have crossed through. People think that it's just Hispanic people that are crossing. How about the fact that we see that we have 30,000 people from Turkey that have crossed over? We have this one was shocking. We have 6,386 nationals from Afghanistan that have crossed over. The Middle East, some of our greatest adversaries on the world stage are crossing over into our nation unchecked. We have no idea what they're bringing into our nation. More importantly, we don't know the ideology they're bringing into our nation and the plans that they're creating. You hear rumors all the time of sleeper cells. We don't believe that we're called to live in fear, right?
Correct.
We don't believe that we're called the scripture's clear. I didn't give you a spirit of fear, but a power, love, and a sound mind. However, that last part, sound mind, demands of us that we make smart decisions.
That's exactly
to
right.
protect our nation.
Just like Solomon.
Just like Solomon. And we look at this, and this is the red flag that should be going up. Alarm should be going off across our nation that we have a potential for terrorist organizations to be rapidly coming through our southern Texas border, but not just getting a free ride into the United States of America unchecked and with no accountability. We have terrorist organizations that are being paid to cross our border.
Yeah, that's what's frightening.
That the federal government is actually funding terrorism the moment that they're allowing this to take place and giving all of these benefits to those that cross over. We see this on a daily basis. But the reason that I think that's important to bring up is that, I just recently got to meet with some of the consulate of Israel, and see some of the footage of the October 7th, the raw, uncut footage that's been vetted by the Israeli government of what took place. And I'm going to tell you this: it's some of the most egregious, horrific, inhumane things I've ever seen. As I literally watched as children, women slaughtered. We did not watch the footage of rape that took place for obvious reasons. We didn't want to see that. But what we do know is that there's footage of literal Hamas terrorists raping women to the point where their bones are broken and they die in the midst of it. This is happening. It's horrific. It's disgusting. It's inhumane. It's demonic.
That's heartbreaking.
And I sat through 45 minutes along with a few others, such as Representative Brian Harrison, Representative Tony Tinderholt, Representative Matt Shaheen. We were sitting there and we're watching, State Senator Phil King was there. We're watching the uncut footage. And the reason they wanted to show us that is to understand what we're up against. And what I took out of watching that video is that the same Hamas terrorist organization that invaded Israel on October 7th, causing literal havoc in their nation, taking hostages, murdering and raping women and children, beheading people. We watched beheadings in these videos, Josh. It's some of the most evil, horrific, demonic things you could ever see. All of the while, they're praising Allah, going about celebrating on the phone with their family. We heard the recordings. It was horrific. But the thing that we took away from that was not just that we have to get Israel's back because they're our greatest ally in the Middle East and that Scripture demands that we protect, the best interest of Israel. We didn't just get that out of it. We understood that with an open border, there's a potential that that's coming to America. There's a potential that we've opened the door for Hamas to do that very thing. And for those who sit idly by and say, well, I don't really want to speak out on the border because it's controversial, I want you to understand that your silence is literal allowance of violence for the future, for our children.
So true.
Your silence is deafening to the future generations of America. Your silence, pastors, your silence on the border issue shows either two things. One, ignorance and not knowing the present danger that could come against our nation. But number two, it shows severe neglect of saying, I would rather stay popular with a church member than I would be truthful so that we can rise up and actually take a stand against evil in this nation. God only knows if Hamas terrorists have crossed over into our Texas border. And I will tell you this, 2024, the election has never been more important, but it is going to take more than just strong policy to rescue us from what's already crossed. Not only do we need to secure our Texas border, we also need to take inventory of those that have come across.
That's exactly right. And that's a great follow-up to the last question here, which is kind of sort of we answered at the beginning of the show. That's, can the state of Texas hire our own Border Patrol agents to work at the borders since the federal government is not enforcing the laws of Texas?
It's great. Well, number one, we absolutely have full authority to be able to secure our own border. And so for those who say we don't, are not very familiar with the Texas Constitution, and you know that to be true, Josh, we have full authority to be able to secure our Texas border. And one of the stances that Governor Abbott has taken just recently in the court case that's led to saying they're going to cut down razor wire is Governor Abbott says you can come and take it if you want. You can come and try, but we're not going to allow that to happen.
Which is why there's been some rumors of this brewing civil war in Texas, right? And that makes a little bit of sense because we obviously don't want that to happen, but that makes a little bit of sense because there are two conflicting governments at this point. You have a federal government which constitutionally supersedes state government, but only on a specific number of issues, right?
Correct.
And then all the other states, according to the 10th Amendment, all the other powers fall to the states and the people respectively. So if the federal government is not doing its due diligence, its constitutional duty to protect the border, then the state must have that liberty to step in, such as Governor Greg Abbott, and say, fine, then we're going to fight back and we're going to ensure, because this is for the safety of the very families whose family members are leading the charge on keeping the border open, right?
Yes.
But of course, they know that. They're up in their, as they say, their ivory tower, protecting themselves, taking guns away from the law-abiding citizens of the Americans, and prohibiting us from exercising our right to self-defense while protecting their own. It's a multiple-pronged issue. But coming back to the border, we have to be able to do something about that, and we should be able to do. And I think the Supreme Court, the recent discrete, if you will, decision. I haven't seen the briefing at all yet, but the 5-4 decision, I want to know what those 4 men and perhaps women on the court, we don't know who voted, but I want to know what they said. What's their precedent in saying that, yes, in fact, Texas National Guard can push back against Border Patrol? There's something about that, and I'm interested in digging into that more.
We have to dig into it. I want to address a bunch of things you said. So the first I want to address, I'm not a doom and gloom guy. I'm confident, and I think as believers we need to carry this spirit that the best days are ahead for the United States of America. I believe that we're going to take our country back in 2024. I believe that Donald Trump's going to be our president, and regardless of whether you align with his personal beliefs in all areas or not, he is the only choice right now for us as believers to get behind, because ultimately he's the reason Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Yeah,
he's the reason that millions of babies will live. He's the reason that we were headed towards a more secure border in Texas. He's the reason that we had economies that would allow us to create generational wealth for our families. We see the Biden administration has destroyed that. He is the person who is going to fight for our religious liberty and our religious freedom. And so can I speak to the nature of his personal life? No, of course not. But again, we're not electing a pastor. We're electing someone who's going to protect the liberties of the church to rise up and be the answer to the world, which comes back to what we believe government's intent was, and that's to protect the liberties of the people. And so we're not looking for someone who can get on stage and quote scripture and say, hey, look, this is what the Bible says, and I want to lead you into this encounter moment. Wouldn't that be great? That'd be awesome for a president. Cool, I'd be down for that. I'd vote for him all day.
Yeah.
But what we truly and desperately need inside the highest office in the United States of America is someone who is willing to say the hope of the world is the local church, and I'm not going to allow any law or any edict or any single person or entity to take away the rights and the liberties of the people of faith, and of people in general. That we believe we believe that freedom. If we don't have freedom for all, then we don't have freedom at all. And so, someone who's going to devote their presidency to giving us a more free country so that the church and the Holy Spirit can do their job is what we're looking for. So going back to, where we landed on, the federal issue of can we secure our own Texas border? Absolutely, we can. But it's going to take bold leadership. We're seeing that from Governor Abbott right now, where he's saying, "Hey, razor wire is up." I've instructed, the Texas National Guard, the DPS. We're doing our job down there as best we can. We passed legislation. We've spent record amounts of funding on border security. Records. We broke the record this year for the amount of funding we did for the border. There's not much more we can do as the state of Texas. We have to step up and continue to say, hey, Border Patrol, if you don't do your job, we're going to do the best that we can to get it done. However, as long as Joe Biden or someone with his ideology is in that White House, we will be undermined at the Texas border, and it's time to flip that seat in the election. We have to get loud, because the reality is that although we believe the best days are ahead, we also believe that God has chosen us to be the solution to this problem and stepping up. And
that's exactly right.
We have to make it happen.
That's a great place. Yeah, I totally agree. And just real quick, at the beginning, you had mentioned talking about New Hampshire. When I was in public office, we in fact did have, and still currently do have, a really bad opioid crisis in New Hampshire. And that, I believe, is in part due to the border crisis that we've been experiencing for years, by the way, for a long time. And so it is affecting the rest of the country. But New Hampshire just had a primary, so to the point of Donald Trump, in this general election coming up, I guess Nikki Haley got pretty well trounced by 11%. So Donald Trump is looking like he is going to be the nominee. I think we all kind of know that.
Yeah.
And of course, Ted Cruz and a whole slew of people got in behind him and started endorsing him. So.
For Liberty and Justice doesn't make endorsements, but me as an individual definitely does.
Yeah, sure.
And I'm behind Donald Trump 110%. I loved Governor Ron DeSantis. I think he's the greatest governor in the history of the United States. I think he's amazing. I just do. I think the way that he fought the culture war, fought for religious liberties, fought against the COVID tyranny was just unbelievable. But now him suspending his campaign and getting behind President Trump, he sent a very clear message in that video. And that was, he just simply said, we can either get behind the American first candidate, which is Donald Trump now. He said, or we can go back to the old ways of old in the Republican Party, neocon Nikki Haley. Who literally, she wants to fund foreign wars. She won't take a stance. She flip-flops back and forth, and she says one thing one day, and the next day she's going to say whatever that crowd wants to hear. She couldn't take a hard stance on gender mutilation for children. I mean, my goodness.
That is my issue.
Shocking.
Yes.
You're a Republican nominee. Or not nominee, but you're a Republican candidate running for the nomination of the Republican Party, and you can't take a stance saying that children should not be mutilated. You know her answer? Well, that should be the decision of the parent. That's like saying, hey, should a parent be able to sexually abuse a child? Well,
It's the decision.
That's the decision of the parent.
Yeah,
no,
correct.
Of course they
You're
shouldn't
right.
be able to.
You're right.
That should have been the easiest question of all time to answer. And so, as believers, this is why it doesn't matter what we think about Donald Trump's personal life. What we know is that he has a proven record of fighting for the standards that we believe are true.
Yep.
And so I say all that to say, what do I believe President Trump is going to do when it comes to the border? Well, he's already said it. He's going to reinstate the Remain in Mexico policy. He's going to re-up Title 42 so that we can make sure that we can fully secure our Texas border specifically and the rest of the southern border. He's going to back up policies that are going to push for our law enforcement to have the ability to actually do their job and not be at risk of being sued for simply doing the right thing on our southern border. And look, there's so many things. He's going to fund border security. This is big. We need someone with a strong resolve that is willing to do what it takes. Let me just say this for everyone watching right now, because I think this is important to hear, is that pro-open border, I'll say it like this. When you have a conversation with someone, I don't care if you're talking with a policymaker, a pastor, or an everyday citizen, if they say they are pro-open border, what they are really saying is they are pro-human trafficking. They are pro-drug trafficking. They are pro-cartel. There is no exceptions here. Pro-open border equals pro-drug trafficking, pro-human trafficking, pro-sex trafficking, pro-cartel, pro-fentanyl overdoses. That's what it means, which is why we have to speak truth. As believers, as pastors, we have to tell the truth about this, is that securing the Texas border has nothing to do with politics and everything to do with justice so that we can ensure the safety of the future generations of Texans and Americans as they go.
That's exactly right. There's no question about it. When this presidential election comes up, we have to elect someone who's going to take that border and secure it for the betterment of our nation going forward and for posterity's sake.
Well, hey, I hope you enjoyed this episode of For Liberty and Justice podcast. Hey, look, follow us on all of our social media at For Liberty and Justice, whether it's on X. I have to say X now. I forget. It's not Twitter. On Instagram, on Facebook. Jump on to our YouTube. We're on all platforms right here. Share this with somebody. It's incredibly important as we ramp up in 2024. We want to reach more people, and we want you to be a part of that. You can, if you'd like to donate or support our organization, you can go to forlibertyandjustice.us. Again, that's forlibertyandjustice.us. We've got some exciting announcements. We're going to be launching a lot more things online. I can't give it away just yet, but it's going to be amazing. We're partnering with more churches. We're doing a church tour this year as we're launching in different counties across Texas. If you want your church in Texas to be a part of what we're doing here at For Liberty and Justice, getting godly candidates in office, discipling candidates once they get into office, and telling the truth and fighting for the truth on the forefront of the battle, email us at info@forlibertyandjustice.us. Again, that's info@forlibertyandjustice.us. Well, thanks for watching the For Liberty and Justice podcast, where we seek to mobilize the church, wake up the city, and take a stand for liberty and justice. We'll see you next time.